So, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today on this talk about nutrition and ADHD. And hopefully, towards the end of it, you will have more of an understanding as to why we should be thinking about nutrition in ADHD and how we can start using nutrition to manage ADHD symptoms more naturally. I will say up front, I'm not a medical doctor. I am a nutritional therapist. So I come at ADHD from a holistic perspective, understanding the physiology of the body and trying to get you to understand your body a little bit better. I cannot diagnose and treat. I am not against medication, but using nutrition can help enhance medication, and medication is not for everyone. So, really, that gap that I'm hoping to fill is to really help support people whom medication does not help. But even if you are on medication, using some nutrition can help enhance the effects that that medication actually has for you. So we are going to jump right in. So who am I? My name is Dana Chapman. I am a nutritional therapist. I qualified, I think 3.5 years ago now. So this is a second career for me. I was in the corporate world before going into nutrition, but nutrition has always been a passion of mine. As I said, now I am specializing in ADHD. When I first qualified, I specialized in mental health, but there are lots of overlaps when it comes to poor mental health and ADHD as well. There are lots of what we call coexisting conditions. So ADHD often occurs alongside anxiety and or depression. And actually in women, what we are finding is a lot more people are being diagnosed with anxiety and depression, but really the root cause of that is ADHD. So it's just an area that I'm really passionate about, and I am really excited to be sharing this information with you today. So what I will talk about, I have a consulting background, so this is why I've got some slides, and hopefully they are useful for you. But what we're going to cover is, I've covered an introduction to myself. I'm going to talk about what ADHD is, and although I'm sure everybody knows. I'll talk about the current treatment options, so that is medication, because I don't know about you, but when I speak to people, often the words that I hear are, I've never heard about managing ADHD with nutrition. And hopefully today is going to change that for you. And there are things that you can start using and incorporating to start managing your ADHD more naturally. I will talk about the nutrition or a nutrition approach to ADHD. What does it actually mean? What do I have to do? Is it going to be onerous? I don't like cooking. All of that will be covered. And I'll talk quickly about blood sugar balance as well, just so that you've got some key takeaways from today. And I'm talking about gut health and the gut microbiome as well, because I love that area. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's an area that's starting to grow in the research at the moment. If you do have any questions for anyone who joined a bit later, please do pop them into the chat or hold onto them at the end, and I will happily answer them then. So what is ADHD? So we know that ADHD is a neurobiological or neurodevelopmental, and I say disorder in inverted commas because is it actually a disorder? We don't think so. It is a different brain type. Your brain, if you have ADHD or a diagnosis, your brain works differently. It is complex and multifactorial, and it displays differently in each person. So one person may struggle with being able to cook a meal, and somebody else may become a chef, for example. So there are varying different ways that each person can actually present with ADHD. ADHD is co-occurs. I don't really like the word comorbidity, but ADHD co-occurs with other mental health conditions frequently. So, like I said earlier, anxiety and depression is obviously often seen in ADHD, and I'll explain and hopefully illustrate why that is the case. ADHD also co-occurs with a lot of other health conditions. So 75% of people with ADHD have other coexisting conditions, and some of it may be driven by poor eating habits, what we call disordered eating or an eating disorder, because a lot of people with ADHD have this disordered eating or an eating disorder, and there are reasons for it. It could be a surge of dopamine. It could also be poor interoception that somebody feels, which means that you may skip lunch and absolutely raid the kitchen at the end of the day. So that kind of disordered eating can lead to other health conditions as well, such as things like type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. And that's what I mean when I'm saying ADHD is frequently coexisting with other conditions. Headaches and migraines are another factor there. So ADHD has a genetic component. So about 80% of individuals with ADHD have ADHD in their family history. So if you have a child with ADHD, the likelihood that you or your husband or your partner had ADHD is have ADHD is quite high. Genetics is not everything. Our genes load the gun, but it's the environment that actually pulls the trigger. So there's environmental factors that also contribute to somebody developing ADHD. Like I said, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, so it develops normally in childhood, and it's about how the brain is wired, and it's about those neurotransmitters within the brain. If anyone watches The Diary of a CEO or listens to it, you may think that you can diagnose ADHD with a brain scan. You cannot. There may potentially be structural changes within the brain, but they are not consistently found. So you cannot really diagnose ADHD from a brain scan. There are no specific structural or functional brain changes that are found consistently across many ADHD cases. There are no biological diagnostic markers, so you can't go to the doctor or the GP and have a blood test, or like what they're trying to do in autism now is diagnose autism via a stool test. So that's the gut microbiome. So currently there are no biological diagnostic markers. There are three major forms of ADHD. There's the hyperactive or impulsive. There is the predominantly inattentive, or you can have a combined type. So combined hyperactive and inattentive. I'm just going to have a little cough. We know that ADHD places a considerable impact on health services and the community, as well as within families. And it's because the community and health services don't really understand ADHD and how to support it in the best way possible. Sorry, excuse me. So what the research has shown to date is that within ADHD, there is an alteration. Oh, sorry, my son's got a cough and I don't know if I've just caught it. So it has been suggested that the alteration of what we call the catecholaminergic system, which is your dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline pathway. So there's an alteration in individuals with ADHD. This is what we call the physiology or the etiology of ADHD, is that somebody who has ADHD has this alteration in how they make these neurotransmitters within the body. So how you make your dopamine, how you make your adrenaline, and how you make your noradrenaline. And I'll show you a genetic pathway in a bit, which will help explain this in a bit more detail. But we also need to understand that ADHD is not just a lack of dopamine. We need to be thinking about the other neurotransmitters as well. So the serotonin and melatonin pathway play a really big role in ADHD. And through the genetic testing that I've been doing, especially on women, what I'm finding is that the dopamine pathway isn't necessarily the problem. It can also be the serotonin and melatonin pathway. And if you think of serotonin, serotonin is our happy, homecoming neurotransmitter. So we have to feel happy and safe. And if you think about a situation where you need to focus, if you are not happy and you don't feel safe, if you feel threatened, your stress response is going to be activated and you won't be able to focus. So serotonin needs to be looked at as well. And then GABA also needs to be looked at. So GABA is another neurotransmitter, and that neurotransmitter is responsible for our anti-anxiety. So it's our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. It's what helps keep us calm. And GABA works in opposition with glutamate, which is another neurotransmitter, which is our main excitatory neurotransmitter. So the naughty boy who can't sit still in school, in the past, hopefully not in the present, hopefully we don't speak about it like that these days, but that is often that presentation is high glutamate, that high excitability, and it's because that balance between GABA and glutamate isn't actually working effectively. So that's kind of an overview of what ADHD is, and it starts to give you a little picture into what the physiology of ADHD is. Like, what is under the bonnet? What are the nuts and bolts of it? What's going on in the brain? What are the current treatment options? So we know that there is only one really treatment option that is available through the NHS and through most psychiatrists and psychologists, and that is pharmaceuticals. And the pharmaceuticals that are available are methylphenidate, which is normally the first line therapy. And what it does is it works by blocking the reuptake of dopamine. So historically, ADHD has been seen as an imbalance. Actually, it's been seen as normally a deficit of dopamine. But that is far too simplistic. Hopefully you understand that from what I've just said. And actually, some of the symptoms of low dopamine and high dopamine are the same. So you can't really know if you are low dopamine or if you are high dopamine unless you do testing and figure that out in that way. So these are some of the reasons why pharmaceuticals may not work, because you can't simply say because somebody has ADHD, they have low dopamine, because yes, it could be low, or it could be high. You have the same symptoms such as lack of ability to focus, insomnia, and anxiety can be caused from either low or high dopamine. You also need to look at the noradrenaline pathway. So pharmaceuticals work on the dopamine pathway, and if dopamine is the problem, then they may be effective. Dexamphetamine blocks the reuptake of dopamine, but it also increases the release of dopamine. So it just helps increase that flow of dopamine in and around what we call the synapse. So this is a neuron. This is how your neurotransmitters actually work. They get made in the nucleus. They then get released into the synapse, so the space between the nerve and the neuron. And then you've got these little catches here that actually need to catch the neurotransmitter and accept it into the cell. And that's how you can then activate. That's how dopamine then becomes active. So this is where most medications work. Okay, so it works mainly on dopamine. And from dopamine, we actually make noradrenaline. And from noradrenaline, we actually make adrenaline in the body. So if dopamine is your problem within ADHD, if you struggle to make sufficient dopamine, if you do have low dopamine, then potentially medication will work. So either dopamine or noradrenaline. If you have problems in both of those, then medication may work. But we also know that there are currently a lot of side effects from these medications. So things like stomach upset, nausea and vomiting, headaches, aggression, constipation, tiredness, loss of appetite, that's a really big one. Heart palpitations, dry mouth, dizziness, trouble sleeping, reduced height. And And some studies have recently shown, that people who took ADHD medications for 3 to 5 years and more than 5 years had a 65% increased risk and a 49% increased risk of arterial disease. So that's heart disease. And I don't feel like the medical profession are explaining this to people who currently are looking at ADHD medication or who are taking ADHD medication. In children, you might find that their height is stunted, and that may come from the loss of appetite that medications bring. So I'm not against medication, but I think we all need to be aware of the side effects of medication and the long-term effects of medication. And what I've put here at the bottom is the efficacy. So how effective medication is remains a matter of debate. We don't actually know whether it's effective or not, because that is circumstantial and it's down to individuals actually explaining whether it is of a benefit to them or not. So hopefully this starts to give reasons as to why we should and can think about other angles to manage ADHD. So a nutrition approach, what I do when I look at ADHD is I understand the physiology, what's going on within that person's body, what is their genetic predisposition, and help to explain ADHD from a physiological perspective. So we know that neurotransmitters are important, and it's an imbalance in these neurotransmitters that leads to symptoms of ADHD. So that's serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, GABA, and glutamate. So at least 6 neurotransmitters. And it's an imbalance, right? It may be high, it may be low. And it's about balancing those neurotransmitters to help reduce the symptoms that you may have. So we know that neurotransmitters are important. So it's important to understand how we actually make our neurotransmitters. And I've got a slide on that in a minute. Neurotransmitters are important, so we need to make them, but they also need to be able to bind to those receptors. So in the image earlier, that catcher that you saw, the neurotransmitter needs to actually bind to the neurotransmitter receptor for it to become active and effective. If there is inflammation in the body, specifically if there is inflammation in the brain, that binding does not happen as effectively. The catcher cannot catch onto the neurotransmitter, which means that the neurotransmitters that you are making just aren't as effective. And inflammation can be driven from a diet, especially a diet that is high in refined foods, refined oils, and sugar. Balancing blood sugar levels is also key to ensure that you have a constant, steady supply of sugar or glucose to the brain. So the brain's preferred source of fuel is glucose. If you are eating high sugar or highly refined foods throughout the day, your blood sugar levels will be erratic, which means that the blood glucose supplied to the brain will be erratic as well. And that may cause you to lack focus or to lack concentration. Gut health is key. So 90% of serotonin is made in our gut. More than 50% of dopamine is made in the gut. And GABA, our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter, is made in the gut. So we need to be looking at gut health, not only from the perspective of a lot of our neurotransmitters get made there, because we don't know if those neurotransmitters actually cross the blood-brain barrier, but they do have an effect on brain function and on brain health. So that's one aspect of gut health. But the gut is also responsible for inflammation to some extent. If there is inflammation in the gut, that can lead to inflammation in the brain. And the gut is where we absorb nutrients from our food. So, like I said, neurotransmitters are important, and how they are made in the body is also important. They are made from nutrients if we are not digesting and absorbing our food effectively, we won't be able to absorb the nutrients that we need to be able to make our neurotransmitters. And then I've put here, genetics can really help us understand more about our own physiology. And I have started doing some genetic testing in some ADHD clients of mine to really understand which pathway is it that they really struggle with, and where would the best support be needed, or where would some support benefit them the most. Yeah, and then often in individuals with ADHD, a lot of research has been done in children, because we know that children is where ADHD presents the most. We used to think that people grew out of ADHD. Obviously, that is not true, but a lot of the research has been done on children. And we can see through that research that individuals with ADHD often have nutrient deficiencies in things such as zinc, iron, and magnesium. And when I go through how we make neurotransmitters, that will become more apparent as to why that actually is a problem for somebody with ADHD. And again, where do we get these nutrients from? We get them from food. So hopefully this gives you an overview of how you can approach ADHD from a nutrition perspective. Are you getting all the nutrients you need to make your neurotransmitters? Are you controlling inflammation so that those neurotransmitters can bind to their receptors effectively? Are you balancing your blood glucose levels to make sure that you're getting a constant supply of glucose, constant and steady supply of glucose to the brain, its preferred fuel source? And what is your gut health doing? Unfortunately, the rates of IBS in ADHD people is incredibly high. So a lot of people with ADHD also often struggle with poor gut health. And is it a chicken and egg? Is it a vicious cycle that you can then potentially break? So using nutrition for ADHD is not a cure. There is obviously no cure for ADHD. But what we want to do, what I want to do through the education that I give, is help manage the symptoms of ADHD through nutrition. And that is doing things like improving memory, focus, energy, and concentration, decreasing brain fog, improving executive function, improving the quality of your sleep. How many people here at the moment have poor sleep? Reducing any comorbid symptoms. So reducing any mental health comorbid symptoms or any other condition that you have or may have been diagnosed with. It's about improving your quality of life and improving energy. So I wanted to give you an example of, I said I was going to talk a little bit more about the fact that nutrients are needed to make our neurotransmitters. And what I've got here on the right is actually a snip of a genetic test. So you can see lots of genes on here, but the reason why I've included it is because it shows you the pathway of how we actually make neurotransmitters in the body. And you can see that the starting point of neurotransmitters is protein. So this is just the dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline pathway. You have a serotonin pathway and you have a GABA pathway as well. And all of them are important. All of them, actually, the serotonin pathway and the dopamine pathway, the beginning point of being able to make those neurotransmitters is an amino acid, which is protein. So you need sufficient protein in the diet to be able to make your neurotransmitters effectively. Then what happens is that protein gets converted into a midway product in the body, and then it gets converted again into dopamine. So I'll talk specifically about this dopamine pathway now. So the dopamine pathway starts with tyrosine, which is an amino acid. These things here on the left give you examples of what nutrients are needed for tyrosine to be converted into this molecule called L-DOPA. And here you can see that vitamin C, vitamin D, BH4, which comes from the methylation cycle, and methylfolate, so folate, are all important for tyrosine to be converted to L-DOPA. If you don't have sufficient of these nutrients in your body, it then is very difficult for your body to convert tyrosine into L-DOPA. And then we see vitamin B6 is important for the conversion of L-DOPA into dopamine. So you can start to see our bodies don't just poof magically make dopamine, if only it was that simple. We need nutrients to be able to make our neurotransmitters effectively. And we get these nutrients from our food. So key nutrients that we need in our diets to be able to make our neurotransmitters effectively are things like B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, and iron. And remember what I said earlier, children who have ADHD, the research shows that they are often low in zinc, iron, and magnesium. These nutrients are absolutely key for us to be able to make our neurotransmitters. There are associations between the symptoms of ADHD and other mineral levels such as magnesium, iron, zinc, copper, and selenium. So if you increase these mineral levels within the body, symptoms often go down or are reduced. I've got a point there on dopamine is made in the gut and serotonin is made in the gut, and we'll go on to the gut in a minute. But what I wanted to start talking about is blood sugar balance. So the key to maintaining stable energy, brain function, and reducing hyperactivity, and also preventing or avoiding binge eating. So binge eating is often a common symptom or side effect or coexisting condition with ADHD. Balancing your blood sugar levels is going to help you manage all of this. It's going to help you manage and have stable energy. It's going to help you have increased brain function or better brain function. It's going to help you reduce any hyperactivity. It's also going to help manage any binge eating. And how do you balance blood sugar levels? Well, balancing blood glucose levels comes down to the carbohydrates that you eat. Are they complex carbohydrates? Do they have lots of fiber in them? That is the first starting point. And then we also need to make sure every time we eat carbohydrates, or every time we eat, in fact, we should be having a source of protein and fat with that meal to help stabilize your blood glucose levels, which is going to give you that ability to have stable energy and to reduce any hyperactivity and to help brain function. I've also put here our brain is 60% fat. So we need to be eating fat to support brain health and brain function. What about the role of the gut in ADHD? We know that the gut microbiome can modulate brain development, function, and behavior. And it does that in a number of ways. It does that through our hormones, it does that through the immune system, and it does it through the gut-brain axis. So the gut and the brain are connected by what's called the vagus nerve. 90% of signals actually go from the gut to the brain. Only 10% of signals go from the brain to the gut. So the gut plays a really large role in our brain health and brain function. So we need to be looking at the gut to support our mental health. We know that good gut health comes from a diet that is really diverse in plant material and in fiber. So again, a reason to be looking at the diet to help support gut health, which is going to help support ADHD symptoms. The research specifically into the gut microbiome, and I'll briefly explain what the gut microbiome is because not many people actually know. The gut microbiome is a collection of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live within the large intestine of the gut. We have over 100 trillion of these microbial cells living in the gut. And these microbes help us break down our food and therefore release nutrients from it. So they help us absorb nutrients. The gut microbiome also creates certain nutrients. Things like B vitamins and vitamin K are made by the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome produces metabolites, which is called short chain fatty acids. And that is how we actually make our neurotransmitters. So that dopamine, that serotonin. So the gut, when I talk about the role of the gut, one of the aspects is looking at the gut microbiome and the functioning of that gut microbiome. Now, the research into the gut microbiome and its effect on ADHD or implications in ADHD, the research is very immature at the moment. But what we are actually starting to see is that there is a lack of diversity of microbes within the gut that correlates with ADHD and ADHD symptoms. So of those 100 trillion microbial cells, you want lots of different families of bacteria in there. And within ADHD, what we see is a reduced number of families. So you may then have a reduced ability for the gut or the gut microbiome to have all of those beneficial effects that we draw from it. We do know that gut microbiome imbalances. So all the families of bacteria within the gut live in what we call symbiosis or harmony with each other. And here I use the analogy of a forest. Within a forest, there are lots of different species of plants, and they all live in harmony with each other. The tall trees give some shade to the small shrubs below because the small shrubs need shade to be able to grow. If you start cutting down the tall trees, that's going to mean that the small shrubs underneath will die because then they're exposed to the sun. So what we need and what we are seeing in the research is that there is an imbalance of bacteria within the gut that often occurs in other conditions that involve neurological function, such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and in autism. Yeah, and there's some other research that is coming out into specific microbes and the effect that they may have on brain health and brain function as well. But the gut and the gut microbiome is also important for the integrity of what we call the gut lining. If that gut lining is leaky, that may then cause inflammation, and that then may cause inflammation in the brain, and then your neurotransmitters can't bind to your neurotransmitter receptors. So there are a number of ways that the gut is actually involved in managing and helping manage ADHD symptoms. And that is the end of the presentation. It was a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to press stop sharing in a moment. I just want to highlight two things. So I have a group program, which is a 6-week online program where I go into a lot of these aspects in more detail. I talk about neurotransmitters in more detail. I talk about gut health and how to improve your gut health in more detail. I talk about how do you start making small, simple changes to lead up to have a big effect, because it's very simple. It's people do often want to walk away and make many changes, but then it makes it more difficult to make those changes lasting. So I do work in a group setting. The next cohort starts on the 2nd of October. I'm very happy to have a conversation if you think that is relevant for you or anyone that you know.